Thank you so much, Deshpande sir, for joining us in this conversation today. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, you're welcome.
Mr. Deshpande, please share a memory from your childhood that has a lasting impact on you as an individual.
Well, I think the transition we made from living in a big city to a little village. My father was a labor commissioner, which meant he always got transferred to big cities. And so he always would be in a big city, and therefore, that put us in English medium schools, convent, and everything else. But suddenly he was told that he was going to be deputed to a little village called Sankeshwar near Belgaum. It's a little village, but there's a sugar factory, and he was being deputed as a labor officer for that particular sugar factory. And so we had the option of either staying back in big cities or being with the parents in a village. And I was in 5th grade, so young fellow, 5th standard. And so we actually said, let's change over to Kannada medium, and we changed over to Kannada medium. And my mother was a teacher before she got married, and of course after marriage she had to give up her teaching. And so she said, well, I'll coach you. I'll coach, my younger sister, elder sister, and me, 3 of us. And my father was posted to Mangalore, and he was supposed to get transferred to this village within a month. And we were supposed to go and join the school in June or something. But then he didn't get transferred for about 9 months. So for about 9 months, we never went to school. So it was like a lot of fun. My mother was a coach. So we would be homeschooled and just had a lot of fun. And then, of course, we went and we stayed in that village for 4 years. So that transition was a fun experience for us.
And so what was the impact? What impact did it have on you?
Well, I think most of the people, go from the best college, best school to another best college to best college and so on. But I had a very checkered education system. I went to convents first until the 4th grade, and then 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, I went to Kannada medium schools in a little village where, very few people would even pass the SSLC. And then I came to Belgaum for 9th grade, where Kannada medium is actually pretty good in Belgaum, and I did pretty good there. I was able to catch up and be number 1. But then I came to Bangalore, and in Bangalore, Kannada medium is very bad. So a whole year, I never went to school. I just studied at home. And then, of course, I went to IIT Madras and so on. So, it wasn't like I was always in the most competitive environment. I was in an environment where I was like a superstar, right? And so going through those different experiences, I think really gets your perspective a little different. A lot of the people who go from the best college to MIT to Harvard to, get the Stanford best degrees, they're always in such a competitive environment. They learn to play the game. But those people tend to learn the game of what somebody else sets up a rule. But when you go through a path that's somewhat devious and, it's off the beaten track, you tend to feel a lot more comfortable in environments where the rules are not set. So you sort of set your own rules to play the game. And so when I look back, it was a real asset. So a lot of times, people really sort of feel bad when they get into situations which are not the most optimal. But those are the best probably learning opportunities for people. So going from the very best that you can always have for your children or for anybody may not be the best strategy for living a full life.
In fact, I've heard you speaking about providing experiential opportunities to your team members will help them grow. So I think that's what it's coming from.
Yes.
So Mr. Deshpande, help me understand, if you could recall one of those accomplishments during your childhood that you were really proud of and that brought tears in your parents' eyes.
Well, a lot of it was growing up in a middle class family, and my dad was okay, but not that well to do. And we grew up in a time where it was all rationed. You'd get maybe 500 grams of sugar a month and so on. So there was not that much to go around. But within that, we all had fun. We all shared and we lived a good life. And so someday I would say, okay, let me do the cooking today. And I would like cook a whole meal. And that would make me really very proud. And my parents also would be very proud of that. So just doing things and sharing things with the family. My parents would, they brought us up with a lot of trust and responsibility. For example, when I don't ever remember as a child asking our parents to say, hey, buy me this toy, or why don't you buy me this or buy me that? Because my parents, from my very early childhood, somehow my mother used to manage the finances, and she would give us turns. 1 month she would say, hey, why don't you manage the finance? So we knew exactly how much money we had and how much trouble it was just to get through the month. So because they made us so knowledgeable about what's going on and not make it into a big mystery, I don't remember ever bothering mom or anything like that. So they created lots of situations for us as in our childhood where we sort of had the opportunity to take responsibility and do things and not be treated like little kids. And that, I think, were all very sweet, proud memories for us.
Thank you so much for sharing this part of your life. So, Mr. Deshpande, you are one of the most sought after billionaires in the world. In fact, in July 2010, you were appointed by President Barrack Obama to the co-chairmanship of the National Advisory Council of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. You are on the board of directors of several organizations. In fact, you are the chairman of several organizations, including A123 Systems, Sycamore Networks, Tejas Networks, Highfire, Sandstone Capital, Sparta Group. You are on the first name basis with few of the top shots in the world. You are a social entrepreneur. You are a philanthropist. And above all, above everything, what I have always admired in you is the kind of humility that you bring in. You are so easily accessible to people. I think every time when I have spoken to you, I never felt that wall. I've personally learned a lot by your sheer presence. I'm just curious, what's it like to be Gururaj Deshpande?
Well, it's, I sort of believe that if you get up in the morning and if you're excited about the day and you spend the day and you go to bed at the end of the day, that's a beautiful day. That's a fantastic day. And if you can live every day of your life like that, you have it made. There's nothing more to life than that. But to be able to live a life like that, I think you cannot get trapped. You cannot get trapped in your success. You cannot get trapped in your wealth. You can't build too many walls around you. So I think some people look at humility and openness and everything else as a big, trait or a merit. But that's not why I behave the way I do. I do it because that's what gives me the biggest joy.
That's who you are.
So that's the way I want to be. I mean, it's not like if you gave me all the options in the world that I would be any other way. I mean, this is the best way I know how to have the most amount of fun in life. It comes very naturally.
Yeah. So just imagine that if your 21-year-old self is having a conversation with you right now, what are you most surprised of and most happy about?
Well, I think when I was 21 years old or whenever, at any stage in my life, it's not like I had sort of charted out a whole course for my life.
Yeah.
And said, this is what I want to do, and just go from one milestone to next milestone to next milestone. Sometimes people lead a life like that. They know exactly what they want to do when they're born, and then they are determined to accomplish that and they will achieve it. That's not my life. My life is, I've just lived a life where I've enjoyed everything I've ever done. And every now and then I meet people, I come across ideas, and it just opens a whole bunch of new doors. And I do things that I never even thought possible. Right?
Mm.
So most of the things that happened to me are things that I probably didn't know I could either do or had the opportunity to do. Let's say if you look back 5 years in a window. So when I was 21 years old, I was at IIT Madras, and at that point, being a good student and doing well in studies and everything else was sort of the most basic thing, and then understanding a little bit more about life. But I had fun doing that. It wasn't like I was sacrificing and worked really hard as a student so that I would have a fantastic life in the future. And then slowly, then I became a good graduate student. I became a professor. I became an executive in a company, an entrepreneur, and now I'm more and more into philanthropy and social work and so on. So each one of these things are new doors that open for me as I've lived the life. And so when I was 21 years old, I was just as excited as I'm today.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, what was that moment when you decided to be an entrepreneur? And what role did your wife, Jayashree ma'am, play during that phase?
Well, I think entrepreneurship was triggered in my mind when after I went to get my PhD. I did my master. I came IIT Madras, did my master's, and then taught for a year. And I loved teaching in universities. So I thought I was going to be a professor for the rest of my life. So I wanted to get a PhD. So I got my PhD, and then I thought I would be a professor, a researcher, and so on. But then accidentally, I met this gentleman, Dr. Peter Brackett. And Peter Brackett was a VP of engineering at a startup in Toronto.
Okay.
And he actually had to quit that company because the company was not doing that well financially, even though technologically they had a fantastic product. And he came to teach at the same university where I was doing my PhD. So we got to be good friends. And then Motorola came and bought that company, and they asked him to be the VP of engineering again. So he went back to Toronto. And within about 3-4 months after he left, I finished my PhD. So Peter called me up and said, hey, forget all this teaching, everything else. Why don't you just come and join me? So I joined him in Toronto. And this is just right after we got married, 1980. So 1980 to 84, in 4 years, even though it was a part of Motorola, it was a little garage operation with about 20 people. So we went from 20 people to 400 people, $100 million, very profitable business and everything else. And I was one of the three, along with Peter, who actually built the whole company. And so that was my first taste of a startup, first taste of what it's like to just take on responsibility and do things and do things that you didn't know you could do and so on. And then I and Jayashree, when we looked back at it, we said, hey, this is fantastic. Now, why can't we do this on our own? But there was no venture capital in Toronto. The only venture capital at that point in the 80s was Boston and Silicon Valley. So we moved to Boston as an intercompany transfer because Motorola communication headquarters was in Boston. So we moved to Boston in 84, and then it took about 3 years to get the green card and status and everything else. And then I left in 87 after I got the green card and then started the company. And then, of course, those days, the venture capital firms were not there. The biggest venture capital firm would be maybe $10 million. So before they gave you the money, they really wanted to make sure that you were committed. And so you had to go without salary at least for a year. And Jayashree also went to IIT Madras, and she had a master's in computer science. And so she kept her job. And we had 2 little kids. So I was unemployed, and she kept her job, and went for a year. And then fortunately we got funded. But then after I got funded, Jayashree quit her job because we had 2 little kids at home. And then within a few months, I had a difference of opinion with my partner, and I left the company. And that was hard because, both I and Jayashree were both unemployed. We were living in a foreign country, no bank balance. And it was a difficult time. But fortunately, within 6 months or so, I got funded to do the next startup, which was a successful startup. So Jayashree played a big role. in actually being there all the way and supporting and being an integral part of the whole venture.
I'm sure, and I've had the honor of having few conversations with her, and always touched. Please convey my regards to her.
Sure.
So, Mr. Deshpande, help me understand. So, during those initial days, you mentioned that you have your own ups and downs. You have your own challenges with your partners, where you exit from one of the organizations, started another organization, living in a foreign country, that too without a job. So, what was that one lesson that you learned during those initial days of being an entrepreneur that you still carry with yourself till today?
Well, I think whenever you come across any problem, it looks a little daunting. And then you sort of deal with it. And when you deal with it and when you get through it, you feel like you're worried about nothing. So going through those situations in life is what broadens your comfort zone. Some people are more comfortable in more ambiguous situations, more uncertain situations. They can take bigger risks. The reason being because they're exposed. They have gone through experiences which makes them feel comfortable that it's not the end of the world. You still have a life. Whereas people, when you live in a very comfortable, very routine kind of a life, your comfort zone is so small that if the coffee is late in the morning one day, you're all upset.
Yeah.
You can't take that anymore. And so I think what I've learned is that every time you get into a difficult situation, it's a great learning opportunity. And if you have the strength to get through it, it just broadens your comfort zone, and then you feel that much more comfortable with life and accepting that life is risky, but you're living comfortably with it. You're not panicking every time something happens.
Thank you for sharing this. I'm sure this is a key learning for all the entrepreneurs who will be listening to your conversation right now. And help me understand, you are a blessed father to 2 children, a blessed grandfather to 4 children, and you've been able to maintain this work-life balance really well. So what has been your trade secret?
Well, I think you sort of have to be very clear in your own mind as to what your priorities are. For me, family has been a very high priority. In fact, number 1, right? So Jay Shri and the kids always knew that if they need me, I'm almost always there. And I was serious about it. I mean, if they really needed me, I would cancel everything and be there. But fortunately, I found that it's not very often that they actually use that veto card. So, and also, I think when I was going through a very busy period of my career, I made sure that I sort of cut out everything else. I didn't go golfing, no movies, no leisure travel, anything like that. Either it was work or family. And so always made sure that I had enough time with the family to make sure that they know that they're very important for me, and that I spent enough time with them.
Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing a part of your life, because several people have written about you. There are a lot of TED Talks, there are a lot of speeches that you've delivered where people have asked you a lot of questions around your entrepreneurial journey. So that was the first section that I really wanted to have a dig into your personal life. Gururaj Deshpande is. So now I request you and I invite you into the rapid question answer round. Now here's the trick. I'm going to ask a question without thinking much. You can give me an answer only in a word or a sentence. Are we game?
Okay, let's try.
Absolutely. So here we go. A piece of advice that has changed your life.
Be humble.
Define life in a word.
Having fun.
Something that you can eat on daily basis.
Eat on daily basis? Salad.
Okay. A friend you miss the most.
I miss the most. Probably a lot of the local friends here that you would not know, but they live here locally in the town.
Okay. one organization you wish you had invested in?
I don't know. I don't really think about that.
Okay. One leader you wish you had worked with?
Many of them. You
Anyone?
know, I think whether it's Bill Gates or Ratan Tata, Murthy, all these are really role models for all of us.
Most influential person in your life and why?
And Gandhi, probably.
Mm-hmm. And
because I think he is the one who lived the life that he really wanted to see other people live. So that true commitment, no disconnect between intentions and actions.
An unfulfilled aspiration of your life?
None. Because if there's something I want to do, I'm just doing it.
Yeah. I mean, people say that you are a synonym to the word conviction. Okay. Your favorite sport?
I mean, it changes with time. It was golf for a little bit, but now it's chess.
Okay. And if you were to start a new business today, which industry would you target?
Right now, I'm in the social sector.
Thank you so much for going through this rapid question answer round, sir. Thank you. So here we go once again in the normal pace. I was listening to one of your TED Talks that you delivered in the year 2012. And in that you mentioned lasting social change does not happen without local leadership. What does that mean?
You can split the world into two groups of people. People who have disposable income, people who don't have disposable income. And roughly out of the 7 billion, it's 2 billion and 5 billion. People who have disposable income, when they have a problem, they're looking for solutions. They're Googling because they have the opportunity to look around. They can buy, they can compete. So a lot of people are competing for those opportunities to make a difference in their lives. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the social sector, if you go to the bottom, all the way to the bottom, they're just struggling to get through the day. Mm. So it's not like they are really looking for solutions for their problems. And therefore, if you want to bring a solution to their problems, it's a lot of exposing them to new ideas, solving the problems, creating role models. It's really bringing about a cultural change to their problems. And that you cannot happen by sitting remotely or coming up with a fantastic solution for their problems. It has to be done grassroots. It has to be right there. And it's that building that capacity and that network is what really excites me.
Yeah. And I've often seen you at Deshpande Foundation, which you run at Hubli as well. So I think that's exactly what you're talking about, that you should know what's happening at the grassroots level. Well,
but also, let's say we want to supply clean water to people. Let's just take 1 million people. If you want to supply clean water to 1 million people, and a lot of these people make $2 a day. So for every 1,000 of these people, you need one entrepreneur who makes $4 a day. And so let's say we have a solution for 4 cents a day to provide clean water. Mm-hmm. So that one entrepreneur who makes $4 a day has to be able to convince these people that they should set aside 4 cents because it's going to improve their health and whatever for the clean water. And then you need 1,000 of those people. So you need 1,000 people who make $4 a day. And then you may need 100 people who make $8 a day, 10 people who make 16, maybe one who makes 32. So you need all this big network to be able to just provide clean water at 4 cents a day. If you come up with a fantastic idea, just like MIT, Stanford, Harvard, all these people, or any IITs do, let's say for 2 cents a day, it's a fantastic improvement, right? But it won't go anywhere unless you have that whole network. Now, if you have a network of these million people using clean water for 4 cents a day, the people who are in that business really understand the value of this 2 cents a day. And so there is a pull. When you come up with an idea, there is a place, there is a receptacle to accept that idea. What happens in social sector is that a lot of innovations that happens, but there is no capacity to absorb those ideas in the people for whom these ideas are being generated. So creating capacity among the people to absorb these ideas is very important.
Got it. Thank you for sharing this with an example. It makes a lot of sense and it comes very alive to me. Yeah. So, Deshar, I remember my first conversation with you. That was in the year 2014 when I came to attend the development dialogue. And I remember very, very vividly, you were talking to a group of students, and there I was standing with a lot of hesitation. I came close to you, and with a beautiful smile, you asked me, "Hey, how are you doing?" And without realizing that I'm nobody, and you were talking to a group of people already. And that was really kind of you. And during that conversation, you mentioned something really beautiful, and that stayed with me for the longest period of time. You mentioned that entrepreneurs are real change makers. And entrepreneurship is a way of living. Why do you believe that?
Well, entrepreneurs tend to look at the world and they see something that they don't think should be that way. Mm-hmm. They see the world as A, and then they say it doesn't have to be A, it can be B. And that motivates them. And then they start looking for ways to get to B from A. And so that's the change that they bring about. And the world has always changed. And there's always been entrepreneurs throughout the history making those changes. But now, the changes are immense. If you just look at your life 5 years ago, you live very differently than you did 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And so now there is opportunities for a lot of people to bring about a lot of change. And so if we can create these entrepreneurs with good values, then hopefully the world will change towards a good thing. And so I think entrepreneurs are the ones who, what really motivates them is to say the world doesn't have to be this way. It can be that way. And those people who dream and imagine and have that conviction to change the world to that new state is what makes them fantastic entrepreneurs.
Yeah. So you have been a founder investor in several organizations. At the same time, you have exited from several organizations, including the coral networks that you were talking about, and then the cascade communication. So on what basis do you decide to exit from an organization that you have built from scratch? Or how do you deal with what you go through in terms of emotions, thoughts, and how do you manage that?
Well, it's two things. One is you have to look at it from your personal perspective, but you also have to look at it from the organizational perspective. Sometimes an organization prospers better if it's a part of something else, right? Or it becomes, so those are the reasons as to why you merge, you acquire the companies and so on, because you feel like that organization can achieve a lot more if it's a part of something else. And if your commitment is to that cause, then it's just another step along the way. Now, from a personal perspective, I believe that almost everything is exciting in life when you get started. First time you get a job, somebody pays you to travel in an aeroplane, stay in a hotel. I mean, you can't believe that actually people pay you to do these things. But then it gets stale after a while. And that's true with almost anything you do in life. You do something, it's very exciting, and you do it for a while, you master it, and then it becomes a chore. When it becomes a chore, my strategy is I just give it up. I don't want to do it anymore. For two reasons. Number one, it's not that exciting anymore. And secondly, there's somebody else for whom it's a fantastic opportunity and they would do a lot better job than I can do. And so every 5-6 years or so, I've changed what I do. I was a student, and then I was a teacher, and then I was an executive, and then I was an entrepreneur, and then I sort of became more like a chairman, not the entrepreneur. And then I became an investor. Then I said, okay, I need to get into philanthropy. And so I became somebody in social sector, right? And so bringing about changes in social sector at scale is what excites me now. And so every time you give up something, then you find something brand new. And most of the people have a hard time with that part of it, because it's a little bit like being on a trapeze. Most of the people, they're on a trapeze, they're bored, they don't like what they're doing, but they don't have the guts to let go and catch on to something else, because it's scary, because they feel like if I give it up, I may not get anything else. And so it takes that self-confidence to be able to say, I'm done with this, I'm going to reinvent. And what I found is that you cannot reinvent yourself unless you let go completely. If you think you're going to make a change, you have to let go completely, create a lot of white space, which for some people is very discomforting, because you're a very busy person and suddenly you let everything go and you get up in the morning and nobody calls you, nobody wants to talk to you, and you have all the free time in the world. You don't know what to do. But it's only creating that white space which triggers more creativity and different things that you could do. And also you think a little bit more differently. You think in a quantum way as opposed to incremental way. And so my first experience of that happened when my first startup failed, when I had to quit, and I had a 6 months of sort of, not doing anything, not being on the payroll. And it was an involuntary break. But after I got things going, and when I look back, that turned out to be the most enjoyable period when I was reinventing myself. And so after that, I've done this every so often, every 5 to 7 to 8 years. I've taken time off and said, what's important for me in life? Because things change every 5 years, 10 years. Your financial situation changes, your family changes, your experience changes. So I think ability to reinvent yourself is what keeps you young, what keeps you motivated, and what keeps you alive in life.
Yeah, so beautifully captured, sir. Thank you so much. So beautifully explained and captured. So that brings me to the next question. In fact, so how do you know what matters? How do you count it, and how do you bring them into action?
Well, it's you have to feel it, right? It's not, you cannot just read books and say, people say, if you did this, you're fantastic. Or other people say, oh, if you did this, you're very good at this. In fact, all of those things trap you. For example, if you're good in sales, everybody says, hey, you're a fantastic sales guy, and every company wants to hire you for sales. But let's say if you're bored of selling and you want to do something else, it's almost like you have to move away from all that. So creating that white space and then giving yourself enough time to actually feel that intensity within you for wanting to do something is very important.
In fact, you have written a book as well on entrepreneurship and impact. And there you mentioned that I like to build companies where each one of the employees feels like a founder of the company. So what do you think? Why is it important that all the employees should feel like a founder?
Well, it's just like, if you run a company, and if you have 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people, whatever, it's nice if all the engines are firing and they're firing in the same direction, right? And so the only way that happens is that if they are just as motivated as you are as a founder. So the mission that you launch, it doesn't matter whether it's a company or a social sector. I try to do the same thing with the foundation. We have, like, let's say in Hubli, we have about 700 people on the payroll. Yeah. I hope all the 700 people associate themselves and feel like the foundation is theirs. It's not really the foundation of Desh and Jayashree. It's really a foundation that belongs to all the 700 people, and they own the mission, and they want to bring about those changes with the beneficiaries that we work as much as I and Jayashree want to. In fact, even more, right? And so it's very important that they feel it and they do things because they're inspired and they want to do it, as opposed to being there because they're scared of us, or they feel like we're going to fire them or something like that. So I think if you want to get the most out of people, you have to make them feel like it belongs to them.
Mm.
And then as a founder, you go through experiences where every year when you look back, you see things that you've done that you didn't know you could do. Right? I mean, that's the, you come as either a techie or a consultant or a sales or whatever, and suddenly you realize that you can actually do a lot more than what you thought you could do.
Yeah.
And the best experience of building organizations is that it's the same experience that everybody that works for you goes through.
Mm.
A lot of the people, when they work with you and you nurture them and they grow, they look back and say, hey, I didn't know I could do all these things.
Mm.
And it's that self-discovery and excitement, which is the biggest gift you can give to anybody.
Yeah.
And when people are excited like that, they do amazing things.
Everything is
and
possible.
you do very little supervision.
So true, so true. So in your entrepreneurial journey, whether as an entrepreneur or as an investor or as an employer or as a chairman, what was that one lesson, either a failure or a missed opportunity, that taught you the most in your life?
Well, I think if you're the entrepreneur, you're driving things. But if you become a mentor or an investor, then it's the entrepreneur who has to drive it. So you cannot take over the reins. It cannot be your idea. It has to be the idea of the entrepreneur. In fact, even when you run a company, you cannot come up with ideas and say, you shall do this idea. You have to be very subtle in terms of, even if you have a great idea, to inject that idea into the organization so that other people have the opportunity to think about it, own it, and then they come back to you and say, hey, what do you think about this idea? And so you don't want to be the author of ideas if you want to be very impactful. You have to co-create those ideas so that other people feel like they are totally committed to those ideas. So the advice is when, as a mentor, as a investor, is not so much to sort of always try to solve the problems. When people come up with a problem, I think as a mentor, the best thing you can do is to always turn around and say, what do you think is the right thing to do? And I find that 99.99% of the time, the other person has the right answer. Mostly because, that's what they do every day and they have all that. All they need is just a little bit of confidence. All they need is just a little bit of support to say, yeah, I think that makes sense. Once in a while, in rare cases, you say, I don't know, but have you thought about this? But in most of the cases, a lot of it is just giving them a little bit of support and confidence that what they're doing is the right thing.
So now, where you are in your life, what's alive in you? It's
the same thing that has excited me throughout. It's bringing about that change. Right now, for example, we're very focused on this bringing about a change for the bottom 5 billion people. So when a farmer makes doubles or triples his income, that's pretty exciting. When an unemployed young lady or a young man goes through a skilling program and gets a job, that's pretty exciting. When an entrepreneur comes to a semi-urban or rural area and starts with an idea and builds a venture, that's exciting. So, or a micro entrepreneur. So bringing about the change is what's very exciting.
Now, let's say if you were to give a piece of advice to people who are struggling to scale their business, what would that be?
Well, I think scaling should not be just for the sake of scaling. In fact, scaling should happen only after everything is debugged and is ready to go, right? So I think scaling is important because it doesn't matter whether you do a small work or a big work, it's just as much effort. So and depends on the opportunity too. Some interventions, for example, social change, it has to scale because particularly in India, it's 1.4 billion people. So helping 100 people, 1,000 people is not going to really make much change. So you have to think big. Markets, as an entrepreneur, depends on the market. Some markets are large and it's important to scale and become a big market shareholder. In some cases, the opportunities are very niche, in which case, within that niche, you want to make sure that you're a king. So you don't want to scale. You want to just make your quality better.
Hmm.
But if you want to scale, you just have to make sure that you build everything that goes around it. You need good engineering, you need good production, you need sales, finance, quality. You need all those things. And each one of those things are like a ring in a chain.
Hmm.
And when you start scaling, what happens is that there is stress. The chain gets pulled really hard.
Hmm.
And when it gets pulled, what breaks is not your strength. What breaks is your weakness, the weakest link. And that's a very hard thing for most of the people to manage, because most of us are passionate about some aspect of the business, and we tend to polish it more and more and more. A good engineer always thinks that he can just sell it by making the product by a better mousetrap, because it's going to be so good that people are just going to come knocking on the door and buy it, because they think that marketing and sales is a waste of time, right?
But it doesn't work
And
like
so,
this.
and if you're sales or marketing, you think the same way. You think, oh, it doesn't matter, I can sell anything. And so you want to make sure that you're very objective about what is the weakest link in your organization. And at any given time, you always have a weakest link.
Yeah.
Because as you strengthen one and you start scaling, then the other part becomes weak. So being objective about the weak links and collectively building those is a secret to scale.
I can relate with this so much in my own current business. Yeah. So, Mr. Deshpande, considering the current situation, the COVID-19, right? There is so much of anxiety and fear in people. Now, let's assume that the world come to an end in the next 150 years. And all that is left is a book about your life. What do you think would be the title of the book, and what would be written about Gururaj Deshpande there?
Well, I'm not a big believer in legacy and all that stuff. So as long as people say, hey, Dash had fun doing things that he did in life, I'm happy.
And let's say if you were to give an advice to your 21-year-old self when you were at IIT Madras, what advice would you offer to that young?
Have fun. That is, do things in life that really excite you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do anything that feels like a sacrifice, so that you're building something for the future. I think there is no point to reach, right? It's a journey. And every day of the journey is precious, and you have to enjoy it. So keep doing things that you really enjoy. And when you enjoy, the quality of the work that you do is very, very good. And so as long as, it doesn't matter what you do, as long as you're doing it well, I think you're contributing, and it builds on itself.
Thank you. Now let's say that if I were to ask a question to my future guest, what do you think? What question should I ask my future guest?
Depends on the guest. What kind of guest are you talking about?
Let's say another entrepreneur.
Well, entrepreneurs, I think always, getting their stories as to how they dealt with it is always inspiring for other entrepreneurs to get through the difficult situations.
Thank you. Now, with all the experience that you have, with all your ups and downs, all your successes and not so-called successes, what do you know for sure, with 100% surety and certainty?
Well, I think people make it into like a dramatic story, all the ups and downs, everything else. I fortunately have never felt that way. It's like every part of the journey has been exciting for me. Like when I left India in 1973, I left India after IIT Madras, and those days Reserve Bank of India had very little foreign exchange. So, and this is not just me, most of the people who left in the 70s, we left with $8 in our pocket, right? So now when you tell the story of $8 in your pocket, it sounds like ridiculous. I mean, how could you send a kid out in this open world with $8 in his pocket? But that's not the experience I had when I left. I was so excited to be sitting in a plane, to landing in an airport, to see this, to see that, and everything else. So, I think that's what I mean by just enjoying every day of your life. And So even the situations that look like very difficult are actually enjoyable. It depends on your situation.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for your time. I
Well,
think,
thank you.
like
Thank
always,
you.
I had tremendous learning, and my faith on humanity has further deepened with the conversation that I had with you. The kind of humility that you bring in, the kind of essence that you bring in, the kind of person that you are. I think for me, it has been a very humbling experience. So thank you so much for
Well, all the best to you.
the conversation.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.